Good morning. My name is Connie Boyer. I'm the mayor of Fairfield. And today my guest with me is Chief Dave Thomas. This is the Fairfield's first town hall. And we've been wanting to do this for quite some time, but we were unable to because of the pandemic. And I think after several months of people getting used to using live stream and Zoom and how to do this electronically, that we felt comfortable to go ahead. We're here at the Fairfield Arts and Convention Center in the Sondheim Theater, and thank you for those people who have come. As you can see, we are wearing masks to accommodate and follow the rules here at the center. And I hope that you learn a lot today. We got some great questions. You will be able to ask questions on the live stream, so feel free to do that. The questions will come down to us here, and any questions in the audience, we have someone here that has cards that can write their questions down, and he will bring those up as well. So let's get started.
Good morning, Madam Mayor. Thank you very much for the opportunity.
You're welcome.
I appreciate it.
So one of the reasons that we wanted to start with Chief Thomas was about a year ago. The chief and I had spoken about a particular incident that happened in Fairfield. And actually, it was multiple incidents, right? And this is one of the reasons that we wanted to do this, was to get more understanding between citizens and how the police department works. So in the summer or thereabouts, there were several burglaries, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
And it took several months to make an arrest on that situation. Can you explain what happened and why it took so long?
Yes. The simple explanation is, to tell you the truth, the quicker an investigation happens, the less time we have to build out evidence. It's always a concern once you make an arrest, because all the clocks start. We have to produce all the evidence we have to the defense teams. So a lot of times people get frustrated because investigations, especially larger investigations, take longer. But because they're larger investigations, we actually want them to take longer. We want to make sure we have overturned and looked under every rock possible and talked to every possible witness, just to make sure that it's documented before we accuse somebody of a crime.
And how does that also, does the department interact with state officials and crime labs and those kind of things?
Very, very well. If you watch the movies where the prosecutor is arguing with the cops and the state and federal are arguing with the local police, it just doesn't happen in real life. We realize that there's not a lot of resources out there, so we all have to work together, and we're all on the same side for justice in the justice system. So a lot of times there's immediate involvement with, say, our city attorney and the county attorney, who are the two prosecutors. They come in from the start, so they have input and they understand different aspects of the prosecution later on. So it's very cooperative, and we cooperate very closely with the state investigators, the state lab. They're all here to help us. That's their main job. They don't come in and try to take over. They're here to supplement and assist. They'll tell you that repeatedly when they come in for larger investigations. So Iowa had it figured out many, many years ago. I can't take credit for it. It's worked very smoothly for years.
The state lab is the one that does the DNA type testing, though. We don't do any of that here, correct?
Correct, ma'am.
And that sometimes can take longer process?
Yes.
Because of prioritization, correct?
Yes, exactly. As you can imagine, it used to be the delay was with fingerprints, and now DNA is a lot easier to obtain and identify. So there is very short turnaround on fingerprints because not everybody in Iowa is requesting, but DNA takes longer. But the state lab is quick to respond. If they get behind by 6 months, they'll take one technician from one department and have him or her work in DNA analysis for a while until they get caught back up. So they are the state of Iowa, especially DCI lab, is very responsive to their customers.
Yeah. But that was one of the cases, or one of the reasons that this case got held up for quite a while, was we were waiting for information from them, correct?
Yes, I always, way back in the day when I was working cases, I would always advise victims of large crimes, this isn't going to be over in days. This probably won't even be over in weeks. Plan on months. Before we build the case, we're going to get to know each other very well. We're going to talk several times. So at least there's some understanding, if you are a victim of a serious crime, that there will be some delay in the prosecution. But once again, if we rush to that prosecution, there's less evidence to present at the time of trial.
Correct. And I realized, do we have a third mic that we could use for Officer Burnett up there? We do have an officer here. He's actually on duty, so he won't be able to stay very long. But one of the issues, certainly this last summer, was a tough year for police officers. And one of the issues is de-escalation training. And I thought with Officer Burnett that he could quickly give us a rundown of what they learn at the training that they go to. So if you don't mind, I think what I'll do is I'll hand you my mic. Sorry, the people in the sound were not prepared for this.
He's excited to be here too.
So you are bringing one down? Okay, great. So why don't you sit in my seat?
Yes, it was fun for me to get in there, Officer Burnett.
They have a lot of equipment to get into a chair. All right, thank you for being so flexible. So could you just talk a little bit about, again, what happens when you go to training? Talk about the de-escalation that you learn there.
Sure.
And communication skills training, that kind of thing, to help bring down a situation that's getting a little bit too emotional and
Yes, ma'am.
too intense.
So in our training, police academies, we do at least a minimum of approximately 15 hours of intercommunication skills and building. We work approximately, I want to say 25 hours of training just on communicating. So we do, over weeks and months, we continue to go over the process of police ethics, which is a common denominator in everything we train on. And as a department, we have continuous training after the 25 hours, which is a minimum, of continuing that process of building the communication and just talking with individuals.
Great, thank you.
No problem.
Any other training that you'd like to talk about that you think is important for the public to know?
Absolutely. The best training that I think that I've gotten over the years is just interacting with other humans. And as a community, it's a small community, so it's more tight-knit. And that's actually the best training that I've ever received. It's not in a classroom. It's not in a PowerPoint presentation. It's actually just communicating effectively, talking with the civilians, citizens of the community, and every day, a different interaction, a different personality, something you learn different every time you talk to somebody. And that's actually the best training that we have as a department that we get to receive.
And can you talk about, one of the things that's been in the news a lot is this systemic racism. Was that any of your experience at training that you felt that was an issue?
Just like with any job, there's going to be bad apples. There's going to be individuals that have a short temper, that don't have enough patience, from whether it's their upbringing or just who they are as a person. I've noticed that us as a whole, as a police department here especially, we pride ourselves on, no racism and the equality, and everybody has their own story. And one thing that we've learned is that it's usually not personal. Most of the time it's not personal. It's the situation they're in. It's the tough time that they're going through. And that process, I don't want to say that there is no issue with any police officer. There's always that one that makes a bad name. And usually they get the most publicity. And that actually personally bothers most police officers that work hard every day. They come for a 12-hour shift, and we work hard to try and make a better name, to try and act as professionally as possible. We check each other, other officers, if we're having a bad day. We try and talk, we try and communicate effectively within a department, within partners, within a shift. It's important to, hey, what's going on? Talk to me. We know it's a bad day. Let's get through this, And through that, I think those bad apples have just gotten a bad name for everybody. And like I said before, they usually get the most publicity out of everybody.
Great, thank you. I really appreciate that.
Anytime, Mayor.
And I know this was kind of impromptu, and maybe you felt like you were in the hot seat.
It's okay.
So I appreciate you coming and sharing, and thank you for your service to our community, and we hope you're enjoying and you'll hang out in Fairfield.
Absolutely.
So,
Thank you, Mayor.
thank you.
Let me try and work on getting out of here.
Okay.
safely.
We got till 11, Officer Burnett. Take your time.
Yeah, why don't you take that up to Lindsay? Thank you. Great, thank you very much, and thank you for being flexible up there in the sound booth, not knowing that I forgot to tell you that was going to happen. So,
Keep you on your toes.
yes, right. I did have an email yesterday with some questions that I'd like to ask you.
Sure.
What the relationship between the Fairfield City Police and the Jefferson County Sheriff's Office? They are two different departments. The police, of course, is under the city, and the Sheriff's Office is under the county. So under what circumstances do these entities work together?
That's a very good question. We pride ourselves in Iowa. Like I said earlier, there's not a lot of us out there, so we have to work well together in different jurisdictions. I know the chief very well and the sheriff very well in Mount Pleasant and Henry County and Washington County. So that, I'm so proud to say, has transferred also locally to the Jefferson County Sheriff's Office and the police department. There are very few people that have that many type A personalities that can get along as well as we do. And to be in the same building, I was told today, I came over here from a different agency, that we're very proud that we get along and are in the same building and share many different aspects of the job with the Sheriff's Office, the Jefferson County Sheriff's Office. So Sheriff Richmond and I are continuing in that tradition. A lot of people don't know this, we share expenses on a lot of different things, such as our dispatch. They're city employees, we pay dispatch salary, but the Sheriff's Office pays for all the radio equipment, which, believe it or not, is very, very expensive. There's a share cost on the building. We only pay 33% of building expenses. The Sheriff's Office pays 66% just because they have 66% of the building. We share our SRT team, which is our tactical team. It's half deputies and half police officers. I could go on and on telling you about the different, but when it all comes down to it, at the end of the day, if it's a deputy asking for assistance or it's a police officer, you'll see both the Sheriff's Office out there and the police department helping each other out in times of emergencies, because that's what our folks expect. That's what our citizens expect, is us to be there. And sometimes a deputy might be out of position or an officer might be tied up, and a deputy will immediately respond to assist. So I can brag about it all day because I'm very proud of it. I'm very proud because it's continuing even better. Whenever you have a new administration taking over, you're nervous. You don't know, but I've known Sheriff Richmond. We've came up through the ranks together. I know Chief Deputy Jerry Marcellus, and they're not just now saying they want to cooperate. They've proven it over the last 20 years.
So how many officers do we have here in Fairfield, so people know?
We have 14 sworn police officers
Okay.
and 7 dispatchers.
And then how many are in the sheriff's department? Do you
Sheriff's
know?
office, I'm guessing, I think it's 10 deputies now.
Okay, great.
Including the sheriff.
And
the
so
chief
for us, generally, we have 2 to 3 people on duty, correct?
Correct. In the city, we have a minimum of 2 at all times. A lot of times the sheriff's office will also have 2 on. And at different times, like during the day, I will also be in the office along with Lieutenant Kinsella. So it depends, but always a minimum of 2 in the city and usually 2 in the county.
So, that means that if one officer is doing one thing and another officer has to go to another call and all of a sudden needs help, he can call for the sheriff's department right away and say, I need help.
Yes, correct.
And they will respond.
If available.
Yeah.
And a lot of times it's a little, obviously, the county's bigger and sometimes it's a long, than a 2 to 3 minute, it might be a 10 to 15 minute response.
Okay.
But definitely any emergencies, they're usually starting towards the city anyway, and they'll respond and help us cover or respond to the officers if they need assistance.
Is there any kind of tracking system that follows that and then we cross-bill each other for services?
Well, let me say, we do bill, we cross-bill for building expenses, something that is expected, and buildings, big old buildings get expensive. So we do cost sharing with that. We have what we call our 50-50 bills, and that means the police department uses as much, such as paper, in the building as the sheriff's office. So we split that 50-50. They pay for it, and then we reimburse them 50%.
But not on a regular call or services.
No, because
generally.
it usually balances out.
Yeah.
They're in the city as much as we're out in the county, so we don't worry about billing. The K-9's a good example. The K-9 belongs to the city of Fairfield. We paid for it for several years through donations, thanks to the community for that. It's a neat program. People ask why we let it go out in the county for no charge. Anytime when this initially started, sometimes people forget over the years, but when this initially started, the sheriff's office donated a bunch of money and a vehicle to our K-9 unit to help us get it started. So a lot of it's payback over the years to pay them back. But like I said, in Iowa, it's always nice when we send a couple officers out to another emergency or our tactical team out. When we have an emergency here, at one point we had 3 different tactical teams from the area that comes in an emergency. So that's the payment we get is reimbursed through work ethics.
And are there differences between the training that the sheriff's office gets versus our police officers? And is that any kind of concern, or is it very similar?
Nope, it's very similar. Once again, Iowa figured out many years ago that everybody should have very professional, standardized training. That means one big academy. There are a few huge agencies that have their own. Des Moines, I think, is the only other one. Davenport had one for a while, but once again, they're at the academy. I digress a little bit, but it's a state academy, and in Iowa, it's not like most states where you have to go through the academy and then try to get hired. In Iowa, you have to be hired and be through all your background checks before you're even allowed into the academy. You have to be supported or represented from a department has to have you. So the sheriff's office deputies have obtained the same training or attended the 16-week Iowa Law Enforcement Academy that our officers have graduated. And so it's very nice when you go to another agency, you know how they're trained. And it works very well in Iowa. Man.
Great, thank you. So let's go back to some other questions that I have written down. When the calls come into the dispatch, how are those prioritized?
We have 2, actually, to be fair, we have 3 different levels we have our priority 1 calls, which are emergency calls. Anytime anybody's life or property is threatened, and God bless dispatchers. As you can imagine, when somebody calls 911, it's usually the worst time in their lives. They are very upset, and the dispatcher immediately has to try to get them calmed down as much as possible, but at least extract enough information to know where to respond to an emergency and prioritize our responses because, unfortunately, we are busy. So a lot of times our priority one call is an emergency. If somebody is being assaulted, a domestic assault that's happening, right, a medical emergency would be a priority one. A priority two is something that can wait. It isn't exactly an emergency, but needs to be a priority above a priority three. A priority three can wait all day. Unfortunately, I don't want to make anybody mad, but such as barking dogs or illegally parked cars or some of the minor complaints we have of people parking illegally. So that's what we call a priority three call. It can sit there all day. They will immediately dispatch a priority one call. The officers will break free and go to a priority one. Priority two, as soon as they're done with the priority one call. But sometimes at the end of shift, you still have several priority three calls. You're telling the next shift they're always excited to go on those barking dogs and those illegally parked cars. But it's a very effective system because when you only have two officers working, if it's an emergency, they need to break free of what they're doing and respond to the emergency.
How does a well person check come into that priority list?
Usually so it would be a priority. Over 300 priority one calls a year, so just less than one a day. A few days will go without, but I think it was 312 last year. So we get a lot of priority one calls, looking at the stats, probably 95% of them are just, I don't want to say a lack of communication, I guess. Somebody who was at the hospital and didn't tell her family or his family, or somebody's gone on vacation and the neighbor is panicked because the mail, they haven't seen him in 2 days and they didn't realize. So 95% of the time we do show up. Fortunately, I should say, it's not an emergency, but we still respond as a priority two call to those for welfare checks every time when we are done with our priority one calls, ma'am.
So I think one of the points here is that being in a small town, we do look after each other, look after our neighbors, which is a wonderful thing. But I think one of the things that could help, right, is, if somebody's going on vacation, to let your neighbors know, let them know who's the family member or friend that has the key to your house or that knows how to get a hold of you. I just know that we had a situation this last weekend where it came out on Facebook, and I hate to bring that up, but there was criticism of the police department, and the reality is, and it was on a well person check, and the reality is that they were on other emergencies, and it turned out that it was fine, but had the neighbors known who to call, I think, and how to get into the house. One of the things we also talked about in this particular case, which you can explain, is you can't just go to somebody's house and kick the door in just because, right? Can you kind of explain that?
Correct.
That's in your way?
I'm not going to lecture you too long. We live in a free country. The government can't come in and kick in your door. You have a right to your privacy. And a lot of times, that's good. We remember that. Sometimes other people. But the only time we can force entry into somebody is, there's 3 exceptions. You have to have a search warrant signed by a judge before a government entity, the police, can enter your home, or there has to be exigent circumstances. And the courts have defined that as immediate emergency, but we can't guess. We have to assume that there is no exigent circumstances unless we see or smell an exigent circumstance. Exigent circumstance would be if you walk up and see somebody inside the door laying on the floor, then we can force entry without a search warrant. Or you smell gas, or hear somebody screaming. So it's very limited, and as you know, most folks in Iowa, myself included, likes the curtains and likes the curtains drawn. And a lot of times when we go on these welfare checks, we can't see in the house. And that's why we don't force entry hardly any of the times. And I guess the moral of the story that we would like to get out is it's Iowa. And we're proud of, we take care of our neighbors. And a lot of that times, that's what keeps the police from having to respond, because neighbors are watching out. If you have that neighbor that does have elderly or might have diabetes and sometimes confused, check on them. If they're not doing well, get them a lifeline so they can push a button and immediately let us know there isn't a medical emergency, and then that's a priority 1 call. Or just go over and check with them and see how they're doing. Take care of your neighbors. They'll take care of you. And it's greatly appreciated by the police department. If you do go over and ask the neighbor instead of calling the police, it's just because we get inundated with these types of calls, and it slows our response down for the actual emergencies. So the more you can help us, the more you can go on these calls. I think sometimes we'll get 3 or 4 welfare check or wellness check calls on the same person, and nobody's actually gone over to check and make sure. And sometimes our dispatcher will ask, our officers are extremely busy, can you go over and check and let me know so I know this is not a priority 2 call anymore. So we're asking, I just said, we have 10,000 people that care about each other in Fairfield. We usually only have 2 officers working, so the help would be greatly appreciated.
And when the dispatch says they're busy, that means they're on a priority 1 call. It's not they're busy and your call doesn't matter. I really want to point that out. And it is the job of the dispatcher to be calm. And it may seem a little bit too aloof for the person calling in who feels like it's more of an emergency. So I think it's from their own perspective and where they're coming from. So I appreciate people's patience on that.
Thank you.
So let's go back to those barking dogs and those noisy neighbors. You do get those calls, I'm sure.
Yes.
And really, tell us really the one way that, I know a neighbor doesn't like to complain, but really to get it fixed, what has to happen?
It's tough because we all get along well with each other, and everybody does have that one neighbor that seems to bother the rest of the neighborhood with their barking dog or their cars parked in the yard or their loud parties. And we definitely understand and that is a priority 3 call, but we do respond to them, obviously, and we try to work it out with the neighbor. A lot of times, it's just talking to both sides and trying to get it worked out. But there are a lot of restrictions, and I get a lot of complaints with the barking dog and the neighbors that continue to make noise, and nothing's being done. And I understand the frustration. A lot of times it's misunderstanding because that's actually what they wanted done anyway. A lot of times when an officer goes to these calls, they'll ask, well, what do you want from us? Do you want this person charged? And a lot of times the person will say, no, I don't want them charged. And I don't blame them, because they then have to go to court and testify that that barking dog or that loud neighbor was disturbing my peace. Well, a lot of times they're mad at the police officer because they don't arrest them anyway or write them a ticket or take them to jail. But I try to explain to them that the courts have been really specific on this. A police officer can't have their peace disturbed. They can't be disturbed by that barking dog or that loud stereo, because they're on duty and they're specially trained, and it's not disturbing the peace. The courts have said you have to have a citizen that will testify that their peace was disturbed. So a lot of times when the citizen is mad nothing's being done, it's actually because they don't want to show up in court. But a lot of times it's just explaining to them. It's real simple. If you want us to show up and talk to them, we'll warn them again. It'll probably happen again. Or if you're fed up with it now, all you have to do is sign a piece of paper and show up in court and testify that that person disturbed your peace. So a lot of times when people are complaining that that's not being handled by the police, it's actually because of their decision not to address it. Once again, I don't blame them. Court isn't scary for me because I've done it for years and years and years, but it is intimidating to show up and testify in court.
Thank you. I just want to remind people who are here, if you have a question, Bob is over here with cards, and you can fill out a question, and he'll bring it up, and we'll get those addressed. Thank you. So let's just go to one more dog question.
Sure.
And let's talk about
here.
the vicious dogs running loose. We already mentioned that dogs running loose are priority 3. We have had in this last year some issues with dogs running loose. We've had some attacks either on other dogs or on people. We did get the ordinance changed a little bit. Can you address that a little bit? How you deal with vicious dogs that have bitten someone or another dog? And also, I guess the one point here is dogs are to be on a leash, even in our county parks, and not loose.
Definitely.
And we know that, we all love our dogs. And that's great. And they're 99.9% of the time, they're great and loving to you and your family. But sometimes if they're loose and they come across other people or other dogs, they're just situations you just don't know how they're going to react. That's why we really request people keep their dogs on leash. But go ahead.
Yes, definitely. And that's the good, I've had a lot of people show up, my dog is the sweetest dog in the world. Yes, your dog is sweet as long as he's comfortable in his home or her home. When he's out running, that's when we usually have issues. We are very happy in Fairfield. The city council and the mayor and the city attorney have given us good ordinances to enforce. They're pretty specific, but they're fair, which we like. We always like fair. We love somebody to have their day in court to make sure they can challenge if we do write them a ticket for one of these offenses. But we do have a loose dog ordinance. You can't let your dog run loose. We also have we have a dangerous animal ordinance and a vicious animal ordinance. Once again, the city council wanted to be very specific. Dangerous animals aren't allowed in the city unless you can control them. And that's to oversimplify it. And a dangerous animal is several breeds of dogs. It's not a vicious animal. I'll kind of explain what it takes to get to a vicious animal, but a dangerous animal is just something that is going to cause more damage if he or she bites somebody. So that's why they made it. And it's big dogs. It's dogs above 100 pounds, Rottweilers, Pit Bulls, German Shepherds. I could go down the list. Great Danes, I think, is on the list. There are several big dogs. And it's not saying you can't have them in the city. It's just if you have them in the city, they're dangerous. So here's what you have to do. And they make it pretty simple. You can't just leave them out on a chain. You have to have them in a kennel if you're going to leave them outside. If you're inside, you're fine. If you're outside on your property and can control your dog, you're fine. If you walk your dog, you have to have it on a leash, and it also has to be vaccinated so you can control it. And then we're happy with your dog. It doesn't become a vicious dog, the other one, until it does something bad. And for vicious dog, I'll try to remember here. Sometimes it's tough. It has to attack, and when we say attack, it has to bite or scratch a human once or another animal twice in a 2-year period. So I think the council understood there are some dogs that are animal aggressive, is what they call it. They'll give the dog one mistake if it runs up and bites another dog in a 2-year period. If it does it twice or bites a human just once, it's considered a vicious dog. And we take then steps to ban that dog from the city. The police department issues an order that your dog has attacked a human once or another animal twice, and you have, I apologize, I think it's 30 days to remove it from the city limits. If you don't remove it, we're going to go pick it up and take it to the vet clinic. Now, that's not the final straw. The citizen or the owner of the dog can appeal our decision to what's called the Animal Review Board, and say, and I've had to testify in front of the Animal Review Board a couple of times, and the Animal Review Board either decides to go along with our banning it or give them another chance. After that point, then they can also appeal it to the city council if they still don't like the decision to ban it from the city. Usually by the time the review board has looked at it and said the pooch has to be banned from the city. And I think it's a great system because those vicious animals that have shown a propensity to be aggressive, and especially to an owner that can't control them, they keep running out the door or jumping the fence or whatever and attacking people, they are immediately removed from the city of Fairfield.
Great, thank you.
Did I get everything?
I think so. I think that helps people understand
I have notes.
what the rules are, so to speak. Thank you. And that's,
Thank you.
Thanks for the next question, because this was the next topic on my list too. Let's talk about mental health calls. How are those, how often do you get those? How are those handled? And the question also says, talk about the mental health interventions, how those are handled, and how has that changed over time? I mean, certainly this is a topic, again, from this last year, where people have called for defunding the police to put more resources into social services and or mental health. And so talk about how that's changed over the last 20, 30 years.
That is an excellent question, because not to tell you guys how old I am, but I'm not telling you how old I am, but I have been doing this job 25 years. That's the only confession you're going to get out of me at my age. But it was concerning when I started, and I wouldn't say concerning, but when I went through the academy in 1995, I was told, listen, mental health isn't a police matter. It's not a crime, so we are not going to train you on mental health response. And it made sense. The instructor said, mental health isn't a crime. Why would we train on it? And it worked. We were telling citizens that, stop calling us. It's not illegal to have a mental health crisis. Well, I'm proud to say in the last 10 to 15 years, Iowa figured out, along with the nation, that this isn't working. We are still going to get these calls, so we can't just tell people we're not going to go, because we're going to keep getting the calls. And we live in a country, I'll say this again, that we have a great system. We don't send people with mental health issues to an asylum like they did 20 years ago. So they're well treated as an outpatient, but they are in our community because they aren't a threat if they're compliant with, it's like any other medical disease. If I had heart disease, I'm okay as long as I'm taking my medication until my blood pressure gets up, so I might go into a medical crisis. Well, we talk about mental health crisis. It's the same way. It gets to be overwhelming, and we can continue getting called all day for this person in mental health crisis, and the public that might be yelling and screaming at cars. We can keep ignoring it, and we're going to have to keep going back. We heard our young officers say, we were waiting for them to step over the line, and we asked, well, what does that mean? Well, until they committed a crime so I could take them to jail because I've been there so many times during the day. Well, that is not good for anybody. The jail doesn't deserve to have that because it's not a proper place for them. We don't want to wait. So I'm very proud to say we and Iowa initiated this, what we call our CIT. It's our crisis intervention team. So anytime somebody's in mental health crisis, state of Iowa offered specialized training for officers to respond to that and actually be able to sit down with them and work through the crisis like a mental health professional would. They asked me if we would be interested, and obviously we were extremely interested. I was proud to say Burlington Police Department and I were the two initiating agencies in southern Iowa to start with this program. Now we have Lieutenant Julie Kinsella is a state instructor for CIT because she's had so much training. And now 3/4 of our department are CIT trained. And you'll see them when we tease the CIT officers because you'll quickly know who CIT is because the officer will show up for a mental health crisis and not know how to respond. And then CIT officer will show up and immediately sit down right beside the person and talk to the person, be able to work through. And we figured out that if we do that initially, it may take an hour. It may take the officer. The hospital was called and said it was so cute because some older lady in mental health crisis walked into the ER hand in hand with this big cop. And that was neat to see. But I saw how well it responded to mental health. I hadn't seen it from the patrol side until one of our crusty old sergeants came up to me and said, okay, I'm now sold on CIT. I said, what happened? He said, we talked to somebody in mental health crisis for probably a half an hour, trying to get that person to calm down and get in the car just so we could take him to the hospital. It wasn't going to happen, and we were to the point where we were going to have to use force. We called a CIT officer off duty and came in. She came in and went and talked to this person, and the sergeant said, it sold me when that person in mental health crisis got into the squad car in 5 minutes of talking to the CIT officer. And it was a win-win for everybody. We didn't get that bad rep for having to force somebody into handcuffs and put them in, the back of the squad car. And the CIT officer just went along with them and is their representative. They actually stay with them at the hospital, and they're their representative, and they let them set the tone. If you want us to sit in the room with you, we'll sit in the room with you. If you want me to be outside and make sure nobody's coming in to mess with you, it's whatever that person wants. And as you can tell, I'm pretty proud of but CIT is extremely effective. And because we were one of the initial agencies, we now have 3/4 of our officers CIT trained. There's only a few left that don't have the CIT training. So it's a fabulous program.
Great. That was really going to be my next question is how many officers do we have, and will we eventually have all of them that have been in that training? And do you ever call in other mental health professionals to help you in that situation? For example, if Jane Doe or John Doe is having a crisis and they tell you that so-and-so is their counselor or something like that, do you ever call that person and bring them into the situation?
Once again, I'm proud. When CIT first came around, they said, you really need to sit down with your mental health professionals and get to know them. And we said in Jefferson County, we've been meeting with our mental health professionals every month for the last 2 years. And they said, wow, you're doing what we recommend. Now, did I do that? No, it was the mental health people reaching out. don't have a lot of room for inpatient, and it's a very high standard. A person has to be an immediately threat to themselves or somebody else before they are inpatient. So 90%, 95% of our calls or mental health crisis are outpatient. I have to give a little brag. I've worked for the government for many years. We don't like to talk about private entities, but Optime we have one mental health professional in the entire county. She is happy to come out and talk to you, but as you can imagine, she immediately would be overwhelmed if she had to come out and talk to everybody. Optime has several counselors, and I've been shocked with them. It's like a government agency. They're that willing to help. They volunteer 2 hours every day for any counseling when an officer calls and says, this person is in crisis, but they just need to talk to somebody. And they'll immediately open one counselor up, and we can bring them to Optime. It's a great private enterprise, public cooperation, because they don't ask for anything in return. They're from Iowa too. They live in this community. They're mental health professionals, and it has been really neat to see how much they've supported our officers. I have one of the caseworkers, and she's also our jail diversion coordinator, in my cell phone, and I'll call and say, you know, so-and-so has called 911 5 times today. I think he's having a crisis. Is there any way you can get him in? And Rochelle will say, yep, I'll get him in, and there quickly. So enough. I don't want to sound like I'm on the bandwagon of Optime, but Iowa's figured out we don't have a lot of government professionals. We need help from the private sector, and they really have stepped up.
So it sounds like we have a good public-private partnership with them.
We have an excellent one.
Is there a CIT-trained officer on every shift?
Yes, it's there. We're getting so many. It's few of us. I'm trying to remember. I'm going to tell you the 2 old people. Lieutenant Joel Smith and I think, are the only ones that are not officially CIT trained. And that's, when you have so many officers, there's always one on a shift anyway.
Great. That's great.
So we're very lucky, very fortunate. Iowa said this is we have to get law enforcement. So all this training was no cost to us, which is fabulous. And a couple of times, Julie Kinsella, she went to St. Louis and worked, I think, in a hospital down there for a weekend, and the state of Iowa paid for her to go down there. They were even offering her if she wanted to go to Texas, and I laughed and I said, yeah, sure, I'm sure you wouldn't mind going down there. But it's these huge programs that they've had for years, and that's why they were sending them. And Iowa, it was a great opportunity through mental health in Iowa. They said, we want your police officers trained, and we'll pay for everything. So we were excited.
Great. Let's go to a little lighter topic here.
Yes.
Question. Any comments how to make the proliferation of bicycle traffic a positive experience for both sides? I mean, we do have a lot of people riding bikes in town, and we also have a company that's interested in putting in the stand-up scooters. Stand-up scooters? Yeah, stand-up scooters.
Really? And
we'll see if that happens this year, not sure. So what's your experience from what you know from your side? Is it comfortable for bicyclists? It sounds like from this comment that it's not always comfortable.
Yeah, it is concerning, and anybody that's operated a bicycle or a vehicle knows it is something on the public safety side we deal with a lot. Traffic is always scary, and traffic's always, unfortunately, going to come together every once in a while in a motor vehicle or a bicycle accident. And we try to, we probably respond to 2 or 3 vehicle accidents, usually vehicle-to-vehicle accidents a day in the city. So it happens. Fortunately, vehicle-to-vehicle in the city is a lot slower speed, so we have less injuries in the city as opposed to the county. But it's still, with more bikes, obviously there isn't as much protection And we try to encourage people to drive safely on both bicycles, and sometimes it's education. We've been educating for 20-some years since I started here, explaining to bicycle riders that you have to obey the same laws on the street that the vehicles do. You're not supposed to run through stop signs. You're not supposed to go, the scary ones are the wrong way on the one way, because in the uptown area, and it sounds stupid, I'm on a bicycle. Well, anytime anybody's backing up out of a parking spot and they're looking one way because it's a one way, they don't expect a bicycle, or a car for that matter, coming from the other way. So once you educate people, they are usually compliant. We don't have to get to where we're writing tickets, but when you're explaining to people that it's the same ticket that you get if you run a stop sign in a car, it's a $200 fine. A lot of times you don't even need to say that. It's just they didn't understand. It's the educational part of it. But I don't know how much you want me to talk about traffic, but traffic accidents are a huge concern in Fairfield.
Well, with bicycles, the rules are that they are not, first of all, they're not supposed to ride on the sidewalk. Is that just uptown, or is that all over town?
Correct. Just uptown. You're not supposed to be on the sidewalks because of citizens exiting the business, and you'll run right into them. That's in a block each way from the square. You're not supposed to ride. Now, if you're riding on the sidewalk, it's recommended on the street, but if you're riding on the sidewalk anywhere outside of our downtown area, you still have to yield to any walking pedestrians. So if you come upon, you need to stop and get off your bike. So the city does have some specific rules for bicycle, but it's for not just the safety of the person on the bike, but the person walking and the person in the vehicle.
And what about skateboarders?
Skateboarders aren't supposed to be ridden in, you guys are taxing my memory here. They're not supposed to be ridden on the streets or the sidewalks anywhere in Fairfield. They're supposed to be, if you get permission from a parking lot. Sometimes, churches will give them permission as long as it's not Sunday. So a lot of education with that too.
Is that just I assume that's just a safety issues? I mean, some people would say, hey, that's a mode of transportation for young people.
Yes, and I assume it came from citizens' complaints, but City Council many years ago said you can't ride them in the street or on the sidewalks because of the danger that goes along with them.
Okay. Let's go back a little bit here to domestic violence calls. One day the chief and I were talking, and this is one thing that kind of stuck in my mind, that you said some of those are the most dangerous calls that you go on. Can you speak to that a little bit? And do those go hand in hand sometimes with mental health calls, or they're just really two separate things?
It can. Domestics nationwide have increased. Thanks to COVID, we've seen an increase in domestic with folks having to spend a lot of time together. And it's understandable. We respond to many domestics on average a couple a day. And the good news is most domestics are verbal only, and there's no reason to make an arrest, and just calm down everybody, and we don't have to respond. Domestic obviously are a very high emotion response for us. Statistically speaking, the only thing more dangerous is a felony in progress response, a domestic response. So the officer's safety is heightened usually, and we want them to be very careful when they're responding to domestics, because a lot of times you don't know who all's upset at who when you walk into a house. It could be between a husband and a wife, but what you don't know is the brother-in-law is in another room and is upset as everybody else. So very high emotions. Obviously, if it's a domestic loud enough that the neighbors call or somebody calls there from 911, there are a lot of risk with domestic assault. So a lot of times when the officers go in and they're trying to get people calmed down, it's more for everybody's safety than it is, and that includes the person, because if they are agitated enough to assault their significant other, they also might be agitated enough to assault the officer, and that's just another criminal charge that they're going to have to face. So sometimes officers, when they go into that, there's not as much understanding as when you call to report a theft. The officer will show up. The officers in a domestic response are definitely on guard, but it is the second most dangerous call they'll probably go on all day long. So we do ask for some understanding. These laws are specific. They do have a lot more authority than a lot of laws in Iowa. You have to have a victim press charges. In Iowa, the police officer can decide if he or she wants to press charges. And we love it because it took the pressure off the victim having to decide and then live in that situation. And I don't know how many over the years I've told that, you know, your wife or your girlfriend isn't pressing charges. I'm pressing charges, and the state of Iowa is pressing charges, and made it very clear to them that what they did was unacceptable. And it's something that through anger management classes that they're usually required to take that needs addressed with them, not with, I've heard every excuse in the book. She didn't wash the dishes, or if that was a reason to be assaulted, my wife could assault me regularly. So it is kind of surprising. You never know what you're getting into when you respond to a domestic assault in progress.
Thank you. So one clarifying question.
Yes.
Did you say that at some time ago it was the victim that had to press the charge, the police couldn't?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
And
I just
I'm
wanted to
proud
make
of
sure that that's what I
Iowa.
heard.
It was one of the first in the nation to go to. We've had it on the books from like the 70s to 80s. They have two new laws. If there's an injury, the police officer can press charges, and we also have what we call a primary aggressor law, which we love even more. And it says that the police officer can determine who a primary aggressor is, that person is to be arrested. And we like that because it's the person that stands there and says, hit me, or hit me, and keeps getting in the other person's face, and the other person finally has enough of it, pushes them back, and then that person hits them repeatedly. They say, well, they're guilty because they pushed me first. They don't have an understanding of the law. But it's not, it doesn't matter who pushes first. It matters why they pushed and who the primary aggressor is. And usually it's very easy to determine a primary aggressor. And Iowa law also says that the officer only arrests the primary aggressor. So it gives us a lot more authority than most cases where you have to have a victim pursue the charges in the first place.
So would the officers use their CIT training to calm those domestic violence situations down?
We utilize so much of the training, and we talk about when we're hiring a new officer. There's a couple things that it's tough to train. You can train ethics. Officer Burnett talked about it. We talked to officers from day one. You're held to a higher standard. Is that fair? No, probably not. But it's what you signed up for. And when you take that oath that she gives you, and then when you go up to the academy and graduate and you give another oath to the state of Iowa, that's the higher standard that you signed up for. And that's why we gave you this badge. It sounds kind of sappy, but we tell them that you're held to a higher standard, but it's because of the oaths you took to the city of Fairfield and the state of Iowa, and also that badge you have on your chest. So a lot of times when we're teaching that part of it, it's very easy to explain to even the younger people. The parts we struggle with, especially with CIT, and it's in all aspects, It's communication. As folks know, and I'm as guilty as everybody else, you always have to have the cell phone, and you're always in your cell phone. There's less communication. And we struggle with teaching officers how to communicate. And where does it work? Everything they do, from the interviews, that's a huge thing. Can I talk to her and not be a total jerk and get her side of the story, basically, is all we need to do when we're interviewing somebody. But when you stop a police car, or I'm sorry, when you stop a car for speeding and you walk up, are you a jerk? Can you be a decent human being? Because that's probably the only time they're ever going to break this minor law. Can you communicate with them and say, hey, it's not a big deal. I ruin a lot of people's days. You were just going a little fast. We'll get you through this. It's an effective way, and that transfers to interviews, and that especially transfers to CIT. That's what we are real proud of, because we have so many CIT officers. I might be the first one in the door, and we've known each other a while, but maybe Connie doesn't like me. The mayor says, I don't want to talk to him. We don't take it personal. We have another officer coming to talk to you, because you have to build up that rapport, especially when they're in mental health crisis. People relate to different types of people, and it doesn't make me any better of a CIT person if I can't relate on one call, because the next call might be different. So we are proud of the communications we teach our officers, because it's the toughest thing, but it's the thing they'll use most in their careers.
During their training, and Officer Burnett didn't come, I don't think I asked him this direct question, but we have a question related to their training. Do law enforcement officers and support personnel receive racial sensitivity training or other education regarding implicit bias related to perceived race?
Yes.
And we could add to multicultural training. We know that, here in Fairfield we have a lot of foreign people that come because of the college and that kind of thing. So can you address that kind of training that our officers get?
The state of Iowa has yearly racial profiling training that is required. And we also have de-escalation training, which is required in the state of Iowa. I'm proud here because we don't just do what's required. We have our own training in addition to, and it includes, and it's kind of a fun area for us. I shouldn't say a fun area, but it's something we're always trying to tweak, because when I first came over here, we were doing racially based training in '99, which when I walked in the door from coming from another agency and they said, you have to sit through this training, I was shocked. I hadn't had any of this. And I said, why? And they said, well, in our jurisdiction, we have a lot of foreign nationals and I liked the training because it was new, and it got me thinking, and it got all of us thinking, because they were right. If I stop a car, and any U.S. citizen in here knows that if I ask for your permission to search your vehicle, you can tell me no, and I can't search your vehicle, and there's nothing I can do about it. And it happens all the time. No, you can't search my vehicle. Okay, have a nice day, drive safe. We, U.S. citizens, know that, but we had this specialized training because other nationals, citizens, don't have that right, and the training was right. They might come from a country that if the police officer says, can I search your vehicle? And they say, no, you can't search it. They go to jail. They go to prison for the rest of their lives. And you can't tell law enforcement in that. And immediately I said, you're right. I didn't even think about that. How much further we have to explain, listen, you can tell me no. What we found out over the years, is the part that I chuckled, the foreign nationals aren't the people we're trying to get consent search from. They're not transporting drugs. We know our meth dealers. We know our drug dealers. And I've never asked somebody from a foreign country for permission to search. It just doesn't happen. It's very positive So we talked several years after I'd been here, do we want to continue this training? Because we're not applying it. We're not stopping cars with foreign nationals driving. And a very smart person, smarter than me, said, well, wait, what about other foreign nationals we're dealing with? That's where we're struggling. It's not that they feel safe driving. Do they feel safe reporting crimes to us? Do they feel safe coming in and talking to us, knowing law enforcement in their country might be different than here? How do we address that? And it's been through cooperation with MIU and sitting down with the folks at MSAE. We're in the schools there a lot, but building up that trust with the kids so they know, if you're ever if you're a victim of something, you can come down and talk to me and you're the one that gets to decide if you press charges, but I'm here to listen. So it improved our outreach, and it's obviously something I'm pretty proud of, but it is a unique jurisdiction. There isn't too many places in Iowa other than Iowa City, all the other college towns that have this issue of, you have a new population every year, and it usually only stays here 4 years, and a lot of people away from their homes for the first time, in a different country for the first time. How do we reach out to those folks and not necessarily be cops, just so they know us? And MIU has responded wonderfully with different programs. Dr. Bell at the MSAE, I have him in my cell phone. It's a lot of different programs, and then you get to know somebody over the years and you build up a personal relationship. But that's what we want, is we want those new freshmen coming in to know that, oh, there's Thomas. That isn't, oh God, there's the cops. That's Thomas. I know him. I'm going to stop and chat.
A few minutes ago, you mentioned about drugs in our community, and I really want to discuss that, about how you feel our community is doing in this area. I mean, a year ago, when I was talking to a lot of people, really, I have people that are very, very concerned about the drugs that are here. I've talked to people who, actually friends who feel like their next door neighbor is a drug house, but feel like nothing is really being done. And I know you and I have talked a little bit about that, what you can and cannot do as officers, and can you just address different aspects of that, how you think it is here, where are the drugs coming from, what kind of drugs do we have in this community? And then and we as citizens, what can we do to make it better or to help the police?
Sure. I'll tell you a joke to start this off. The joke is, we tell our new officers all the time that you're going to deal with 5% of the population 95% of the day. You're not going to be able to go to Walmart because everybody that you've arrested last week is going to come up and tell you they're not doing meth in the middle of Walmart, or they're going to come up to you and say, I didn't assault my wife. It's going to embarrass you to death to go to Walmart. So I tell the crew now, it's kind of nice when you become the chief because you get to meet the other 95% of the population. I knew you guys from my kids' sporting events, but I never really got to know you like we know the 5% of the population. And unfortunately, we deal with the same folks over and over. It's a small percentage, but it's our officers get to know, and we tell them over and over that just because that person was arrested last week, they're going to be a victim probably next week, whether it be from, you might arrest them for drugs and then they're assaulted by their drug dealer. We still have to work as hard as you would for anybody else. And I'm proud to say that they take pride in that because a person will come in and say, I know you arrested me 2 weeks ago, but I have this thing going on. And we immediately tell them, My job is to take care of you because you're a victim, and it doesn't matter. You're done with that. You paid your debt to society. We're moving on. We're going to deal with what happened to you. And no matter what drug you bought, you still shouldn't have been assaulted, and we're going to work hard for you. So I kind of give you that caveat going into dealing with people on drugs or selling drugs. It is very frustrating because it seems to take a while to accomplish. We usually, when I was a lieutenant working investigations, I said, we know who's dealing the drugs. It's gathering enough evidence to arrest the people dealing the drugs. And sometimes that takes a little while. But when it's, what I've seen from experience is you don't think you're going to get there, and then a traffic stop happens where they find the one piece of evidence you were looking for, and then all of a sudden the case that you didn't think you were going to close is closed in 20 minutes. So, and I'll tell folks starting out, I will tell you that I know they're selling drugs, you know they're selling drugs, but the courts have said that's not enough. We have to know the drugs are in there. We have to have somebody that sees the drugs in there and tells me about it before I can get that search warrant, because once again, we live in a country where I can't kick in somebody's door and without a search warrant. And a judge has a right to say, that's the system we want to work under. And it's most frustrating when it's drugs because it takes a while to build a case. But a lot of times it's just reminding the citizens, we just need your help a little bit. It's nice if they're able to write down plates for us and a quick vehicle description. That builds our case. We get a lot of people stopping for 5 minutes. Judges love that on search warrant applications. That shows the ongoing criminal conduct of, it's not just that one traffic stop where this guy had a little bit of marijuana. It's 20 stops for 5 minutes, and every one of the stops has a drug history. That's what we call building a case, and that's what gets us to the search warrants. The other part of it is, once again, the citizens' help of calling us when it's going on. I've heard that a lot from let's just say experienced drug dealers that come from different jurisdictions that come here and say, man, the cops are here all the time, you're harassing us. And it's not harassment if we're getting called. Most people love to see the police in your neighborhood. I always chuckle when somebody says it's harassment when the police are in my neighborhood. It's usually a complaint. I never see a police officer. I'm always happy when the police are in my neighborhood. Why are you upset? You're not doing anything illegal, are you? And of course they say, no, I'm not doing anything illegal. I just don't want the police there. But we usually educate them too when we respond, and we tell them up front, this is Iowa. Neighbors are going to watch out for each other, and if there's a fight in your front yard, they're going to call 911, and we're going to show up, and it's not going to go away. They're not going to put up with this in their neighborhood. You can't fight. You can't yell and scream. You can't sell drugs, or people are going to call us. So you might as well go to wherever you think you can get away with this, because it's just not going to happen here in Fairfield in Iowa. So a lot of times people don't see that, and they call in plates for months and months and months and are upset because nothing's happening. And then a night shift officer makes one traffic stop, and because we are very good at communicating, we send out all that information in intelligence reports to each officer, and they know, oh, that's so-and-so who's selling, and they ask for our canine to come there, and we make a case within 20 minutes that we've been building up for a couple months. It's always very rewarding at the end for police officers, but citizens don't see all that it takes to build the case to get to that search warrant, but that's what the officers are always trying to do.
So are we tracking the flow of drugs into Fairfield? And
Into and out.
into and out, okay, great. And do we also track the sale, particularly the drugs, to minors?
Yes. I don't, a lot of there's two different groups. There's the young folks that unfortunately are using and maybe selling to young folks, and they're the older folks. A lot of times they don't intermingle. I've asked some of the older ones, they say, I won't sell to kids. I thought they were doing the ethical thing until I asked why. And every time they told me, well, it's because kids talk and I'm going to get caught. So it's not necessarily the ethical thing. They don't trust each other, which kind of makes you shake your head. But it is, once again, a small group, 5% of kids. But it's usually 20, 21 maybe.
So you're saying younger kids will sell to younger adults and kids, and older folks will sell to people their age?
Yes.
Interesting. And I'm assuming that we do work with state agencies on these kinds of things and other jurisdictions on the path.
The more effective is the school system. We work extremely close. I'm very proud of that too, that when a lot of kids know you can't bring it to school because, and we ask, why don't you bring it to school? Well, we know the teachers are watching. We know the principal's watching, and we know they're going to call if we have this in the school. So it's not that they are trying to do the right thing and keep it out of the school. They just don't want to get caught with it.
Are there any programs proven to be very effective to keep drugs out of particularly the hands of the young people? Because it seems like once they experiment or get stuck in it, it's a lifelong challenge for them.
We looked at different programs, especially when the DARE program, we were participants of the DARE program, which is the police. And at the end of the program, they were looking at stats, and it wasn't very effective. Not that we weren't reaching kids, but we were reaching the kids that probably weren't going to do the drugs anyway. And a lot of studies showed that the ones that were at risk, a police officer telling you not to do it is just not as effective. So we looked at other programs. Quite frankly, the most effective were the counselors or actually in the school. So, we kind of got away with it, but it wasn't that we were trying to stop doing DARE. It just wasn't as effective. And that was nationwide, they found that. It wasn't an us study, that was a nationwide study that there just wasn't a huge drop that they saw in other programs that we weren't related to, but we kind of stopped doing it because we wanted to give more time for those programs.
Can you talk about Taser use? I'm sorry, you're probably getting dry because you're doing all the talking, but we really appreciate
like usual, right?
I want to check my time. It is 10:20, so hopefully
Into the home stretch.
if we don't get through all these questions, then we will do this again.
There you go.
But can you talk about Taser use? When does that happen? What's the procedures for the police to use their Taser?
Tasers are interesting because we reanalyze all the time with tasers and how we utilize them because, when tasers first came out, it was tasers hurt for a little bit, but pepper spray hurts for quite a while. So we were leaning more towards taser just so somebody didn't have to suffer after being that force used on them. And once again, it's what we teach the officers, what I was taught in the academy. Force is to gain control of the situation. It's not for punishment. And anybody that gets in trouble, once they gain control of that, they're not allowed to use that force anymore. And it's only allowed when it's justified. So taser and pepper spray and grabbing somebody and putting them in handcuffs are all uses of force that have to be at a high level of resistance. It isn't just, no, I'm not going to put my hands behind my back. We still tell them again and again, you either put your hands behind your back or I'm going to have to grab them and force them. And if somebody is physically resisting, it has to be a higher level for Taser. So starting out, Taser has to be you just can't Taser somebody because they called you a name, obviously, or hands behind their back. But the other part of that, the part we struggle with is what is less invasive on the person resisting us. If I grab them and they continue scuffling with me and I have to take them to the ground, would the Taser be a more effective and humane way of taking that person to the ground and then getting them handcuffed? People are surprised. That's our Taser training. It's not Taser everybody. It's use it when it's safer for you and that person than scuffling with that person. And sometimes we don't get a lot of choice because the person is running at us and tackling us. But it's something we struggle with because it's a more humane way.
How often would you say it happens here?
We probably maybe once a month at the most, probably less than that.
And does the officer then have to report that to his, do some kind of report?
Definitely. We not only do any case they do, they have to do a full narrative case report. Any force used, we have to have what's called a resistance report. And it has to specifically list on top of their case file report any specifics on the force they use, medical attention, if there were any injuries. What else could have we done? We're always looking at. And once we get that resistance report, it works up through the chain of command. So when I say the chain of command, the first person that looks at it is Sergeant Rysdam. And he'll look at the recordings and look at the reports and figure out if it was justified. And then it goes to the lieutenant of patrol, that's Joel Smith. It'll then go to Lieutenant Julie Kinsella, who's our assistant chief. It then comes to me. So now we've had 4 supervisors make sure we did everything right with whatever force we used there. So there's a lot of checks and balances. And it's a lot easier now. Instead of having to listen to everybody's with all the different camera angles, it's usually like we're there. The officers now are wearing body cameras, so there's a view right there. And then there's a car camera. Everybody has body cameras, so you have different angles. There's different squad cars there, so you end up looking at about 5 different angles of any force that's used. So it is a lot more effective as a supervisor. Instead of me having to ask, well, what happened, I can actually see what happened.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, great. I want to go back to the bicycles. There was a question. Do you offer any bike safety training opportunities, especially for schools? Or does anyone in the community offer that, like the bike shop?
They took that, another more organized, and I don't even remember now who it was, but somebody that was better at bike safety than we were. What's nice about the schools is there are a lot of, once again in Iowa, a lot of community partners that reach out to them and they have this program or that program, so they'll have them do that one thing. We were doing that for the longest time. We don't have to anymore because somebody stepped up and it was somebody with state extension, or I apologize, but it was just a group that did a lot better bike safety stuff than we were doing, that's for sure.
Well, maybe that's something we can find out and see, make sure that's still happening.
Yes.
And if not, try to get it going again.
I think it is, because you can drive by the younger kids and see them out taking the training. So
if the police officer goes by with somebody on your handlebars, do you stop and take their bicycle away? Because that's what happened to me when I was young.
Once again, usually
I thought I'd share that. I got in trouble once. Took my bicycle away for like, I think, a week.
Yeah, and that's probably, you remember that lesson. It's like me with the one time I challenged my parents growing up. You quickly remember those lessons.
Right. Yeah, it's not all that fun to go home and tell your dad, who was on the police reserve at that time, to say, I'm walking, Dad. right?
Yes.
I got my bike taken away.
Yeah, yeah.
Anyway, so I just wondered if that still happened.
We don't take bikes like they're just a headache to store, and we have so many rules with evidence. A lot of it's just education now, and that's, I'm proud to say that's what we're getting better at. Once again, it's the communication. Do we want to be that tough jerk that took the bike from the kid, or do we want to be somebody that educates? Our greatest program with kids and bike safety, and I love this every year, we give tickets to the kids. They're good tickets, though. We call them good tickets, and the kids will come up and say, "Can I have a good ticket?" If we catch them doing anything good, like riding single file on the roadway or wearing a helmet, our good tickets are, it was an ice cream treat at one of our shops. And of course, everybody wants to help out with, so a lot of businesses will say, "This year we'll do the good kids ticket." So that, we're proud of those programs because it is more positive. Hey, you're doing it right. And of course, a police officer stopping a kid and telling him in front of all his friends that I'm glad to see you wearing that bicycle helmet or whatever, or coming to the stop sign, here's a good kid's ticket, is a lot more effective.
That's neat, neat. How do you determine when and where to try to stop speeding violations? You know, some people think that you hide in the alleys to catch people. Or I've also heard, don't you have more important things to do than stop 80-year-old ladies? Because they're not speeding.
Traffic enforcement is tough. Most time we don't have time for traffic enforcement. We tell them, try to do traffic enforcement, and we give them tools. When I started, we had to sit in alleys because we only had handheld radar, so it's called stationary radar, so you had to be sitting still. Now all the squads have moving radar, so if you're coming at them or even going away from them, they can tell the speed you're going. So a lot of it is with the technology now. We don't have to sit in alleys, but traffic is tough because it's effective for one reason and one reason only. It's a huge public safety thing. I'm usually proud of the top 10 list Fairfield, Iowa makes, and you see them all the time in the media. There's one list that we made a top 10 per capita in the state of Iowa that we weren't proud of. A few years ago, it was accidents. Anywhere in Iowa, the Iowa Department of Transportation did, and we ranked in the top 10 in Iowa per capita for traffic accidents. So the state of Iowa says, with you doing that, we're going to do all these cool things for intersections. Obviously, intersections are scary because that's where traffic is coming together, and that's where they hit a lot. But one of the huge things for accidents is speed. And we all don't want to say, yeah, I know. But if you're speeding, you're going to be injured. You're going to have worse injuries. If you're speeding, you're more likely to become involved in an accident because people don't expect you to be going that fast. So one of our top 3 things on the reasons for having this many accidents is speed. So when we are out there stopping cars speeding, it isn't trying to pick on grandma that's 80 years old going to church. It's to remind people, even on Sunday, speed is going to cause accidents, and we're trying to get off that top 10 list. And we're trying to get people to slow down. And it's an example I've heard instructors use. I chuckle every time I go on vacation. I take my family on vacation. I obey the speed limit. I don't obey the speed limit. I shouldn't say this. I love my family dearly. I'm going to tell you that up front. But I would drive faster, and it's not safe for them. But I think I'm a good enough driver, and I can drive fast to get there. Everybody's wanting to get there. That is not the reason I usually drive the speed limit. It's because there could be a police officer around the corner or a trooper, and I don't want to get stopped. So I try to go the speed limit, and a lot of times that enforcement is a deterrent, but it also makes the roads a lot safer. I made a safe trip because I went the speed limit. The kids are complaining because it took forever. But a lot of times it's keeping me safer because I'm concerned that trooper might be right around the corner and I don't want to get a $200 or $300 speeding ticket.
And you might choose a location based on complaints. from the
Definitely. A lot of
community,
times
correct?
we do.
Yeah.
A lot of times we get a lot of people that complain that say people are just flying. Especially at school time, we're even more concerned because the kids are out walking. But people are good to call us and say, people are flying through my neighborhood.
Is there anything outstanding on our statistics list that you want to comment on? Every year, the chief does bring to City Council statistics on all kinds of information. Is there anything there that really is outstanding that you want the community to know?
I'm a little cautious with statistics. We always give the report in February, and the reason is because we are still compiling statistics from last year. And when I say that, we talk about officers doing longer investigations, but if they take a report in December and think it's this one crime and they investigate it all January and arrest somebody and charge them with another crime, we have more effective stats at the end of January than I do at the start of January. People ask why. Well, there's a lot of cases still. So if I report burglaries to City Council, it might go up by another 10 or 15 if they make an arrest in January. I try not to wait too long through. It'd probably be even better in March, but it's probably going to only be 1 or 2. But there's significant changes in our stats through January because officers are still investigating crimes. So that's the only reason I'm cautious. The numbers, we don't even really look closely at them. We know that a lot of our self-initiated activities everybody else had a weird year. We had a very weird year with COVID, with people staying in. We had a lot more domestics. We didn't do as many traffic stops because of the COVID exposures. We had a lot more crimes reported. They were the bigger crimes. So we want to get specific stats. That's the only reason I'm hesitant now. I want to make sure by February we should have set numbers, and I'm guessing by the first or maybe the second council meeting. But we have already seen a reduction in traffic stops. Somebody was concerned about the traffic stop. We did a lot less traffic stops, but we asked why. That's why we look at stats every year. Why did this happen? Well, one of the huge things, I didn't even think about it until I asked. We had 3 officers away at the academy together, plus we were training them, plus we had another officer on light duty for a while. So we had a lot less officers. They were working a bunch of overtime, but they were concentrating on cases. That has to take a higher priority. And when you have 14 officers, 3 of them at the academy, and when they come back, then they have to go through 12 weeks of training with another officer. That officer is training. They're not doing a lot of traffic stops. They do traffic stops 2 or 3 days, but they're doing criminal investigations. So there's a lot of different. The biggest thing, though, was COVID and 3 officers at the academy at the same time.
And I think even this year, just for me going across town to go to work, there was a certain period of time where there were just less people on the road.
Yes.
Also because of COVID, because people were staying home.
We're very interested this year in crime stats. We'll get back to you.
It does bring up a topic here and a question, which you just mentioned. We had 3 officers at one time going to training, which is unusual. We certainly have a young staff, and we have certainly seen turnover in the last several years. Can you address some of the reasons behind that? That's the question here. And what are we doing to promote officer retention?
It is a very tough area. And if we get it totally figured out in Fairfield, I can probably go tour with the nation and be able to retire early. You're never going to do away totally with officer retention. And because I'm lucky to belong to the International Chiefs of the Police Association and the National Police Chiefs Association, and everybody's saying the same thing in the emails I get. In the huge cities, we can't retain officers. We can't find officers to hire at our standards. so it's nationwide already. So it definitely isn't a Fairfield alone, but I don't want to just say that and say there's nothing we can do because it's a national problem. It's something we have addressed when our retention, I don't want to take a lot of your guys' time, but when our retention started, officers were leaving, we sat down with them and said, tell us the 5 areas. And we didn't say 5, we said, tell us the areas we can improve that'll get you to stay here. And they gave us 5 topics. We've addressed 5 of those. It was pretty easy. Some were tough. One of them was training. I want more training. So it's tough when you only have 14 officers. You can only send 1 or 2 to training because they're gone. Last year, a huge surprise to us, we didn't even think about it, but we were complaining about COVID. All of a sudden, training was super because we didn't have to send anybody, dispatchers or officers there. It all was online, so the officers could stay here. They could still help us out if need be. So we did a bunch of training last year. It was a lot easier than sending somebody to Des Moines and having to stay at the academy or in a hotel, whatever. So that's one area. One area was pay. And the city just addressed, it's probably been 3 or 4 years ago, but the police officer, the city employees get a yearly raise in July. The police officers in their first 5 years get annual raises also. And it's to make up that, I don't want to say we lack other departments, but there was kind of the bridge so we were compared to other departments. Because that's the biggest thing about law enforcement that's tough, and I always joke around with the chief at the Burlington and the chief in Washington, wherever. We're fighting over that 4 or 5 that are really ethical and have passed all our background, and then there's 10 positions open and only 4 applicants that have passed. You seem to be fighting each other over it, but it's specialized because Iowa is statewide with the certification. They are very attractive, us included. If I hire we hire a new officer here just to send them to the academy, and this doesn't include pay, but it's uniforms we have to pay and tuition up there and the meals up there. Not even the pay we're paying them, it's about 10 grand to train a new officer for 16 weeks at the academy. So a certified officer, once they get through the academy, they're an Iowa certified officer, is very attractive to other agencies because they're already saving $10,000 when they hire them. Officer Burnett was a certified peace officer with a different state, so we could send him to a shortened version. So we spent $2,000 instead of $10,000. So we give any certified officer that applies for us a $6,000 hiring bonus, and people say, oh my God, why are we doing that? Well, we're already saving $10,000. So that's why we want to encourage certified officers to come here. But it's very difficult now because there are a lot of agencies, and inherently, and I won't argue why a lot of the states is the exact opposite, but in Iowa, a deputy usually makes a lot more than a city police officer. I'm sure we can argue about taxes, but in the county they don't have libraries and a lot of different programs, so there's a lot of incentive, and we, so we even have a place in Jefferson County that will pay more to go and do the same job. Sometimes it's very difficult to retain.
Yeah. So obviously pay has been a big thing. Great, thank you for that question. What can you tell us about the officers or the department's protocol on wearing masks? So this question has to do with, police officer has responded, not wearing a mask. They've been requested to wear a mask. They might have to go back to their squad car to get it. what's their direction?
Well,
And do you have a policy right now with that?
we have a procedure. We usually don't make policies. The struggle that is the governor and the health professionals are telling us it's all inside that you should wear a mask. And a lot of times contact with police are outside, and now we're encouraging our officers to, I mean, we're not, and we know it's cold and we're usually dressed warm, but you know, when the officer asks you to step outside, it's also for your protection with COVID and his protection. But a lot of times, you know, the governor has said if you can't maintain 6 feet distance and are inside, you should wear a mask. That's what we've told our officers, and a lot of times when they complain, the officer didn't wear a mask, well, you were outside and 6 feet apart. That's what they're requiring. Sometimes people want you to wear a mask no matter what, and we understand. We treat it like we do any other safety equipment we give our officers, such as our bullet-resistant vest. We require you wear them if you're in a dangerous situation. If you're inside and can't stay 6 feet, we encourage you to wear them any other time, but it's up to the individual officer. And sometimes, for some reason, people get upset very much to the point where they'll call me and say, so-and-so didn't have his mask on. Well, was he outside? Well, yeah. And officers have a tendency of staying 6 feet away from anybody anyway for a safety barrier. We train that, so a lot of times the officers are taking the state requirements.
And I could also see where if they're driving in their car by themselves, they probably don't have it on.
Exactly.
Correct? And
traffic stops aren't a real high risk because they're outside. I know the citizen is inside, and there's also a barrier of some kind, usually part of the window.
yeah.
And the officer always stands back a little bit from usually. So once again, the other part of it is, and I try to tell citizens, it's not just COVID that we worry about safety. There's also officers, it's very important to have peripheral vision and pay attention to their surroundings all the time, and to be able to communicate quickly on the radio if there's an emergency. I took off my radio, but the dispatchers accuse us all the time of yelling into a microphone and it's muffled, they can't hear. So you got to kind of talk away. Well, as you can imagine, dispatchers hate the mask. So a lot of times the citizens aren't thinking about anything but COVID. The officer is thinking, well, if I have to call for help immediately and I'm outside, it's less risk to me. I've heard it, I guess we'll talk about, I've heard it from the officers about, and I don't want to get into a vaccination discussion. I'm in law enforcement, so we try to stay neutral. But we asked our officers, and I don't want to give the names or any numbers, but we asked them, we were one of the first ones in Iowa to be offered the vaccine. We immediately said, who wants them? And we understand people have new babies. People have at-risk people they're taking care of, elderly at home. So it's different for everybody. We only had a couple requests of vaccination. And the question that came up probably shouldn't have, but I'm glad it did, that our officers were asked, well, why don't you want the vaccination? And every time we heard, and I'm proud to say this, why would I waste the vaccination? I'm very low risk. I'm in shape. I'm young. If I get COVID, I'm going to be sick a couple of days. Save it for the elderly people or the at-risk people. Don't waste it on me, basically. And that's kind of their, anybody that gets into emergency services, that has to be the frame of thinking, is you have to put other people before yourself.
That's interesting, because I was just on a call yesterday. Businesses could get on. It was actually public, with the Iowa Department of Public Health, and they were talking about how this vaccination rollout's going to happen in Iowa and what the priorities were. And right now, they're actually having trouble getting enough vaccinations just for the first tier, which are basically the healthcare workers. So that is interesting that they have that attitude.
And that was the other thing they said. It's emergency services, they were using common sense. They thought EMS should get it before police, and we asked why. And it's right. EMS is the ones in the front line right now. They're the ones that get the COVID patients and have them in the back of the ambulance. So there's more exposure as opposed to we're standing outside, lifting the cot and helping them out with that. So there's not the exposure, but it's that proverbial, when we're talking to a new applicant, what you want to hear from them is that uncontrollable desire to help people. Yeah. And that's what makes them successful, especially here in Iowa. It's putting everybody above you. When they're having an emergency, you need to drop everything and go help them.
What are the two most important things everyday citizens can do to help support the police in their work?
Man, that is tough.
It's a loaded question, isn't it?
Yeah, it is.
It's a loaded, good question.
It's tough because I think Iowa does it a lot better than, let's just say, some communities on the East Coast and West Coast. You see on the news, the police are hated. The more Iowa folks, especially in our community, see that, the more they reach out to support us. The more, it's the proverb. I always joke when I'm going to meetings. Sometimes I have to take an unmarked squad car just so I hate being late to meetings, but I'm stopped so much when there's been a bad moment in law enforcement in Iowa and thanked for the job, or just given that thank you or that stop, and I appreciate what you're doing. The biggest thing I've heard at a national level is law enforcement is getting so depressed now with all the stress going on and the concern every time you go to work that you could do something that makes you lose your career and your family's livelihood. And on top of that, one of the retention things we look at is it's tough to retain anybody, because if you can imagine every day the worst thing going on in Fairfield, you might only have to experience once a year, such as a death in your family, or a burglary, somebody breaking into your house. Hopefully it doesn't happen. But with police officers, that's every day. The worst thing going on in Fairfield, they respond to. So they get very callous, very, I don't want to say depressed, but they kind of get that sick sense of humor to try to deal with the stress. But it's the thing to continue working in this job and to retain them is the support of the community and the support at home. And we see that definitely so much more here than they do on the East and West Coast. So one of those main things we're asking for, this community already does for us.
That's great. That's great. Thank you. So thank your law enforcement that regularly, show appreciation.
And evidently
and be a law-abiding citizen. That helps too.
Yeah, and most citizens are definitely that way. And it's you, like I said, if I'm late for a meeting, I have to take an unmarked car or I'm not going to get there on time.
Do law enforcement have regular overtime, would you say? this person says, we've heard 1 hour of overtime per day. Is this the case? And if so, what is the reasoning behind this practice?
Nope, we don't have 1 hour a day. We have to do it under, obviously, federal standards, federal law. It's kind of tough. Our dispatchers and police officers are different, but dispatchers, there's no exception. So they have to be, we don't do work weeks. We do pay periods, so it's 2 weeks, but it's 80 hours. They have to be at 80 hours. Anything over 80 hours, we have to pay them overtime. But their schedule, they work 2 12 and 2 8 shifts, and they have worked out to where they are at 80 unless we keep them over. The officers have an exception. It's not fair to them exactly, but it's the schedule that offers more protection. They work 12-hour shifts. The federal government is one of the few exceptions. Everything else, if you go over 80, you have to pay them overtime. In law enforcement, they have to go over 84 hours before they get overtime. So, but there's no set one, excuse me, there's no set overtime. We do pay overtime, but it's court on their days off. It's the emergency at the end of the shift, and we had to keep them over an hour. Most officers, though, are within that 84 hours every 2 weeks.
And this question actually may have derived with some confusion. I know there was questions in the sheriff's race about their overtime and their pay and all that jazz. So I think that might be a question also for the sheriff's department.
Yeah, and I don't want to say
I don't want to go there and have that discussion because I don't know what it, I don't know the details. But,
I don't think it was.
But that's not the case at the city level.
No, and I don't think it's the case at the sheriff's office level. I think it was kind of a loaded question. If the sheriff's office does it they have a different program on a 28-day. You have to work so many hours in 28 days before you qualify for overtime.
So we're about done here, and I just have a couple things. It's been a tough year for law enforcement, and I wanted to have the quick discussion about why you do not make announcements related to, public announcements related to events that don't happen here, national events, maybe a statewide event. You're not making comments on that. And can you just speak to that a little bit, the reasoning why?
Definitely. There was a lot of concerns with some of the huge nationwide events, and there were a lot of questions on when we should make statements and when we shouldn't. And there's a couple of things that we try to look at. If we made comments on national tragedies, we would be releasing statements every day. There's usually a national tragedy, such as what just happened at the National Congress. We don't have time to make announcements, media release. We do a lot of media release, but it needs to be, our standard is for local public safety. If it's a threat to you folks, the media is fabulous with us. They'll get that information out a lot quicker than we can on Facebook but that is the media release that we usually do. We have a missing juvenile, or if you're doing a bunch of media releases, those aren't effective because it's Fairfield PD is releasing another media thing. Who cares? It's some national thing going on. The other idea we have, I shouldn't say idea, it is good practice in times of crisis that people that succeed as emergency services, especially as supervisors, are calmed when there's emergencies. The good supervisors we have, the more stress it is, it seems the calmer they are. Everybody else is yelling and screaming, and it's a weird reaction. It's not normal, but that's who we promote, and that's who we try to be. So when there's a lot of upset citizens that something that's happened in a different state. We don't make comments because we try to be calm and be the continued professional the same way we were before. And that's also an issue too. If you start making comments, public comments about national things that don't happen even in Iowa, it's the next time somebody wants you to make a statement for whatever they're upset about, you start to get into, why didn't you make a statement about this tragedy or that tragedy? And you want to be able to respond to emergencies. You don't just want to be making media releases after media releases. We just don't have the staff. I don't have a staff of people that tie it. We had 2 dispatchers volunteer to do our Facebook page. That's how little staff we have of when we're doing a media release, it isn't a media person, a public information officer. It's Julie Kinsella or I, Lieutenant Julie Kinsella or I, maybe Lieutenant Joel Smith, but we're busy on an emergency and one does need to stop and do a media release so the public knows where to be safe, but there's huge concerns because we're taking a supervisor away in an emergency situation. So
It's time consuming. That's ultimately
it is.
It is time
and
consuming.
a lot of questions, especially
because
with the state.
It takes a lot of thought to put that together. And so
If it's a big emergency, the Des Moines will call us, and it's every agency. When you do a statewide media release, when we have something huge that happens in Fairfield, you can't believe the calls we get all day long with somebody wanting a comment or a confirmation.
Yeah, thank you. So I'm just going to give the chief one more question, but at first I want to thank the people who came today here in person and the people who are watching at home. Thank you for caring about Fairfield, being interested. And I hope that this has brought some answers to some of your questions and a better understanding about how our police department works. The whole idea is to bring your government a little bit closer to you so that there's less frustration, there's more understanding, there's more getting on the same page.
Definitely.
With how we do things. And can you say 1 or 2 things that are most rewarding about your job, and why should young people consider this as a career? And we'll end it on that positive note.
That's excellent. That's excellent. It sounds corny, but it's very truthful. If you want to do this job for a career, the thing you have to have deep in your heart is when somebody is having their worst day ever, you turn on all your pretty lights and you go to their house and you tell them you're going to make it all better. That's what keeps people coming back, because day after day of seeing negative, and it might be once every 2 weeks where you have a positive impact. That one positive impact will carry you through the next 2 weeks, where you can come in and, like I said, somebody that's maybe had a death or been assaulted, and you can say, we're here and it's done now. We're not going to allow that person to assault you anymore, to the point where I know I have relationships with victims that will still call every once in a while and just check in, because they're probably braver than I could ever hope to be, to report a crime and to stand up to somebody that did something terrible to them, and to go to court. And they'll still, it's what I'm most proud of, is they'll still call every once in a while and say, hey, just checking in, I'll let you know, the wife and the kids moved to Arizona and everything's so much better. And that's the part of the job that keeps you coming back to and gets you through the bad stuff.
Great, thank you. Thank you very much, Chief. Really appreciate your time on a Saturday morning to come out and chat with our citizens. Thank you so much. Thanks
Thank
to
you.
Fairfield Media Center for live streaming. We really, really appreciate Jason and the center for doing that. Also, Lindsay and the staff here at the Fairfield Arts and Convention Center for allowing us to use this beautiful space. And we hope it's soon when this will be filled with people and watching a concert or a theater or whatever it is that's happening here. So we look forward to a better
We are
2021.
ready. We are ready.
And I think it's a little bit, it's a few months away yet, but hopefully by the end of the year things will be definitely looking up compared to this last year. And our best wishes for health for everyone in 2021. Stay healthy. And again, thank you very much. Thank you. Bye.